Just a nice little video for us to think about expanding our community, to think about who we can pray about inviting to one of the Easter services. You know, we also have a Good Friday service you can invite people to. And one thing, if you saw it in the River Cross News, we're also going to have a sunrise service this year at 7:30 at a park nearby. I forget exactly which one, but I'm also, for one, looking forward to that. I remember going to sunrise services when I was a little kid, and looking forward to doing it again this Easter. All right, well, today we are going to be in the book of Luke, and we are going to look at disappointment. That's a word I'm going to use quite a bit throughout here, but you could also add maybe frustration, anger, upset, etc. Now, disappointment is maybe the feeling you get when you look at your March Madness bracket. How many of you filled one of those out? Or maybe you're really maybe it's looking good because it's such a mess that you happen to pick a random team in there who's still alive, and you're like, yeah, what, Florida Atlantic, you know, and you're like, you're cruising, you're not disappointed, you're about to win that office pool for the first time ever. Disappointment is the feeling I get when, once again, I got leftovers, I put it in the container, and I got all the way back home, and I start looking for it, and I realize I left it at the restaurant once again. So, and that's the best case scenario. At least I didn't leave my wallet or my keys, or, you know, usually I don't leave my keys since I have to get in the car. But anyway, I'm often disappointed because I leave things. Yet what do we do when we are disappointed by Jesus, specifically in this passage, but also disappointed by God in one way or another? So in our story, we're going to see people that are going to withdraw from Jesus. They're going to get angry. They're going to stop listening to Jesus when they become disappointed with him in what he says. They're disappointed about what Jesus says and about what he does. So when we are disappointed in God or Jesus, I'm going to offer to us that we should connect with other believers, that we should talk to God about it, and that we should try to draw near and stay close to him and hear what he has to say and what he wants to teach us. All right, so again, we're going to jump back into Luke chapter 5. And a couple months ago, in Luke chapter 5, the beginning part of the chapter, we learned that Jesus healed a leper and a paralytic. And we saw not only Jesus' healing power, but how he took on some of the priestly roles. And instead of the previous kings who were punished for doing things like that, Jesus was still able to bring healing to the leper and to the paralytic man, and the crowds were rejoicing. They were excited to see Jesus. They were rejoicing about the things that he was doing. And so let's once again set the stage here, because in Luke 5, verse 17, Luke writes this. He says, "One day Jesus was teaching, and Pharisees and teachers of the law were sitting there. They had come from every village of Galilee and from Judea and Jerusalem." So these Pharisees and teachers of the law have heard about Jesus, and a lot of them have traveled all the way up from Jerusalem. They want to hear more about him. And at this stage, they're at the very least hopeful. They're wondering, you know, is this guy someone who will help our cause? Is he someone who we can, you know, kind of join in with our Pharisaical movement? Or, you know, is this guy someone who's going to help us? Or is he going to be a hindrance? And at least at the beginning, I don't think they would have traveled all that way if they weren't a little bit hopeful. Again, I'm sure there were some in the crowd who were like, yep, this guy's going to be a problem. He's going to be a problem. And they're just, you know, kind of their minds were made up ahead of time. But I'm sure some of them were like, this guy's powerful. He's bringing in a crowd. We hope that we can co-opt him to our message. And I think for maybe some of us, again, 2,000 years later, it's maybe helpful to look at a verse and kind of understand at least a little bit about what these guys are thinking about. And one verse they might use as a mission statement would be 2 Chronicles 7:14, which says, "If my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven and I will forgive their sin and will heal their land." So what are the Pharisees hoping for? They're hoping that people will turn from their wicked ways and turn back to God. They hope that God would rescue them once again, like he rescued them from the Egyptians and the Babylonians before. He's hoping that he would rescue them from the Romans. They hope that people would follow the law well and honor God by fasting and keeping the Sabbath. They hoped God would honor their piety and come and act once again on their behalf and redeem Israel. So again, they have high hopes and expectations for Jesus, but as we'll see today, he's just going to be one big disappointment to them. Not to everyone in our story. For some people, they're going to be thrilled with Jesus and what he's doing, but for the Pharisees, he's going to just be one big disappointment. All right, so let's start in here at Luke chapter 5, verses 27 and 28. After this, Jesus went out and saw a tax collector by the name of Levi sitting at his tax booth. "Follow me," Jesus said to him, and Levi got up, left everything, and followed him. You know, The Chosen has, I've not watched too much of it, but The Chosen has talked a lot about Matthew and his background and his backstory. And yeah, it's an interesting subject because I'd love to know more about this interaction too. We just see that Jesus sees him, asks him to follow him, and Matthew leaves everything and follows Jesus. And then he wants to throw a party. Let's look at it, verse 29. Verse 29 says, "Then Levi held a great banquet for Jesus at his house, and a large crowd of tax collectors and others were eating with him." Again, he's excited. He's excited about his new friend Jesus, and he wants to tell his friends. He wants to tell the only people that will hang out with him, which are other tax collectors and sinners. So they all get together, and they're having a great time. And then some other people are there to complain. Verse 30, this is what they have to say. "The Pharisees and the teachers of the law who belonged to their sect complained to his disciples." Notice they didn't complain right away to Jesus. They're complaining to the disciples, right? "Why do you eat and drink with tax collectors and sinners?" Right? They're complaining. And the mindset of the Pharisees seems to be something like this. Some people are worth God forgiving, but others, they just need to get what they deserve. And the Romans and tax collectors of the world, they're the ones who need to get what they deserve. And that complaint of the Pharisees seems real in my lifetime as well. You know, there's a temptation for me or for Christians to separate themselves from unbelievers, right? And we can forget how important it was for us to be told about Jesus, how it changed our lives to know the love and forgiveness of Jesus. So again, like that video showed at the beginning, I pray that we'd be given opportunities to invite a friend, to be able to invite them to a service, to let them be able to experience and know the love of Jesus, just like in this story Levi or Matthew experienced. So here's Jesus' response. He answered them, "It is not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance." When I hear this verse, I think about it was probably like an old Gunsmoke TV episode, or maybe a Little House on the Prairie or something like that. But as Jesus says that, I think of an old-time country doctor. And he's got to go door to door, you know? So if someone's sick, he's got to go to where the sick are. And that's what Jesus is kind of saying. He's like, I've got to go to where the sick are. And the people that are on the outside of society, again, I've said this, David said this, you know, the people that are on the outside of this society know that they need help. The tax collectors of the world, the lepers of the world, those people know they need Jesus. They know they're sinners. They know they need him. Whereas the Pharisees in this situation are going, I don't need anything. I've got it together. You're the one who doesn't have it together, Jesus. You need to correct some things. We don't have to correct anything. We don't need you. And so they're not really looking for anything that Jesus has to offer. Again, Jesus says, I've not come to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance. All right, let's continue with our story with the next controversy, right? So Luke has decided to bunch these controversies together, 5 in a row of where the Pharisees and had a problem with Jesus and bring it up. And we're going to see them going from really hopeful, really interested in what Jesus has to say, to completely shut off. I don't want to hear another thing you have to say. We're just trying to get rid of you. All right, so that's the progression we're going to see. So here's our second one we're going to look at today. It's in Luke 5, verse 33. They said to him, John's disciples often fast and pray, and so do the disciples of the Pharisees. but yours go on eating and drinking. So they have an accusation, right? And they're saying, boy, man, you guys compare unfavorably. Don't you hate that? Don't you hate it when like people would maybe compare you to an older sibling or a younger sibling, or kind of just to take a little dig at you? You know, other people do the dishes all the time, but you don't. You know, so they're saying other people fast. These other people fast and pray. You know, even John's disciples fast and pray. Your guys, I mean, they're just out partying with the tax collectors all the time, I guess. Now, one thing I want to point out is in Luke 3:21, 5:16, 6:12, 9:18, 9:28, 11:1, all these verses point out Jesus prayed a lot. He prayed a lot. He just maybe didn't do it out in public or in front of everyone else to see as much as they wanted. So maybe that's where the accusation is. But there's also a little bit of maybe they saw Jesus pray, but they're kind of condemning his disciples for not praying enough. Anyway, I feel like that is a pretty weak accusation, but the one that they're going to really land on here is they don't fast. Don't you realize how important fasting is? John's disciples did it. We did it. Why are your disciples not fasting? And here's Jesus' response. Jesus answered, "Can you make the friends of the bridegroom fast while he is with them? But the time will come when the bridegroom will be taken from them. In those days, they will fast." So when I was looking up fasting, I looked up the church fathers. So here's a couple fasting quotes for you to kind of chew on a second. One of the desert fathers said, "If you fast regularly, do not be inflated with pride. If you think highly of yourself because of it," meaning fasting, "then you had better eat meat. It is better for a man to eat meat than to be inflated with pride and glorify himself," which seems to be a little bit of the issue that the Pharisees here had. And then St. Augustine said, "Fasting cleanses the soul, raises the mind, subjects one's flesh to the spirit, renders the heart contrite and humble." All right, so fasting has had value in in Israel's history. It has value in church history. It's something that we certainly should do and should continue to do. Jesus is not anti-fasting. His point is, you don't start fasting on Christmas Day, am I right? That's just the wrong time to start fasting. You don't decide, today is the day I'm going to mourn in sackcloth and ashes when you're going to your friend's wedding. You're going to stand out. That's just not appropriate, right? And so he's saying, I'm not anti-fasting. He's pointing out that this isn't the time or place for fasting. And he looks to the future, though, and he says, but I am going to be rejected, and at that time, my followers can fast. So he's answered them well. The question is, were they listening? And the question is, did they really want to take that home or even listen to what he had to say? Jesus has come. The kingdom of heaven is here. He's bringing forgiveness. The Messiah is finally here. What are we fasting about? This is the time to rejoice. This is the time to party and just praise God for what he's doing. This is not the time to be going around mourning. But the problem is that Jesus knows what time it is. Some of his followers know what time it is. But the Pharisees still don't know what time it is. They don't understand who he is, so they don't get what he has to say. And then he goes on, and I touched on these verses a couple months ago, so I'm going to just kind of zoom by them today. But let's read them again. He told them this parable. "No one tears a piece out of a new garment to patch an old one. Otherwise, they will have torn the new garment, and the patch from the new will not match the old. And no one pours new wine into old wineskins. Otherwise, the new wine will burst the skins. The wine will run out, and the wineskins will be ruined. No new wine must be poured into new wineskins. And no one, after drinking old wine, wants the new, for they say, the old is better." So in these verses, Jesus is bringing something new, and people will not be able to fit the new way Jesus is starting into the old systems. Jesus is not just reforming Judaism, he is refashioning it into something fresh. Yet verse 39 says that many in Jesus' day are comfortable with the old Judaism systems, the sacrifices, the temple life, and are not looking for anything new. So again, I think for many of the Pharisees, they're going, can I take Jesus, can I take him and his authority, his power, his awesomeness, and can I patch him onto this old system? And Jesus is saying, I'm bringing something new. You can't just take me and patch me onto your old systems. But then he's also saying, but I also get it. I get that you've got this whole system going, and a lot of people, when they have something good, they're like, the old wine's great. I'm just going to stay with that. They don't want to change. And again, some people are more ready for the change than others. And most of the people that are ready for the change are the people that respond to Jesus well. All right, we're going to keep on going. This is, of the 5, this is number 4 of the controversies. One Sabbath, Jesus was going through the grain fields. Sabbath, all right, here we go. And his disciples began to pick some heads of grain, rub them in their hands, and eat the kernels. Some of the Pharisees asked, why are you doing what is unlawful on the Sabbath? All right, so this controversy comes from them going through the grain fields and the disciples picking heads of grain and rubbing them in their hands. Now, our first issue might be that we're from a different culture. We don't take kindly to people going into our yard and picking our vegetables or our fruits or anything like that, right? We thought at one point some neighbors might have taken some of our oranges, and so, we were incensed. How could someone possibly do this? Deuteronomy, though, decides to start to tell us a little bit about the topic. This is what Deuteronomy says. If you enter your neighbor's vineyard, as one would do, right? You may eat all the grapes you want. Amen. That's pretty awesome. But do not put any in your basket. There we go. If you enter your neighbor's grain field, you may pick kernels with your hands, but you must not put a sickle to the standing grain. All right, how many of y'all enjoy picking strawberries or blueberries around here? That's a good time, right? Oh, yeah. And the idea is the same. When you're walking through that blueberry field, you can pick them and eat them. Who could resist, right? Who could resist not just picking some and eating them? But the idea is you're breaking the law, though, if you decide to pick a bunch of blueberries, put them in your basket, and then jog out of the field and not pay for them. All right? So the idea is the same. If they're just walking through a blueberry field, you can eat one. If you're walking through a grain field, you can eat one. So in that way, it's like, what's the problem? They're not breaking the law. They're just walking through the grain field, picked some, and ate it. The problem is that in the thousands of years in between, some of the Pharisees have decided that this is work. This is work. So here we go. Jesus answered them, have you never read what David did when he and his companions were hungry? He entered the house of God, and taking the consecrated bread, he ate what is lawful only for priests to eat, and he also gave some to his companions. And if you're like, I know David talked about this recently, so you guys are probably you already know what's going on, but I still read this and I'm like, what? Exactly, what's the connection? And all right, so he starts off, have you never read? The assumption is, yes, they have read this, they just don't understand. Now for us, though, this is not a very common story of David. Now, as you know, I'm a David. We have another David here. We like David. We like David's stories. If there's I like top 10 lists also sometimes. If there's a top 10 list of David stories, this one ain't on it. All right? And that says a lot. Most people don't have 10 stories of them in the Bible, right? David has way more than these 10 stories, and some of it is because I would venture to say he's kind of maybe a little bit more of a minor character in this story. But anyway, let's give a little bit of a background. It's found in 1 Samuel 21 and 22. The story we're familiar with is Saul's trying to kill David, but David's good friend Jonathan, who's also Saul's son, comes to him and says, yep, it's bad. He's trying to kill you. You better run. So that's where it starts here. So David's on the run. He goes a little north of Jerusalem. He goes to the town of Nob, and he shows up there, and he's like, I need some help. I need some bread for my men. And the guy's kind of like, really? Like the priest is like, you seem a little strange. Where are your men? I'm on a secret mission from the king. David he deceives him, right? He could say, we don't ever know, we don't know if he was just afraid, because he does do things like that when David's afraid, or if he was trying to protect the priest. We don't know what's going on. But anyway, David comes, he comes to a priest, he asks for bread. The priest says, I don't got anything except for the special consecrated bread. And he asks him, are you and your men clean? And they're like, yes, we're clean. We're going out on a mission. Of course we are. And so the priest is like, all right, I'll give you the priestly bread. So he gives him the bread, and then David's also like, by the way, I'm on this secret mission, but I don't have a weapon. He doesn't actually say that, but he does ask, hey, do you happen to have any weapons? And he's like, well, I do have the sword of Goliath. Oh, that'll work. So he gives him that, and then Ahimelech prays for him, and then he leaves. So again, David comes to Ahimelech, he gets bread, he gets a sword, and he gets prayed for, and then he leaves. But the bad news is that Doeg the Edomite saw him. So we fast forward to 1 Samuel chapter 22, and if you read about Saul, after a while, there's one prop that he has to have, and you might think it's his crown. Does anyone else know? What's the prop that every good Saul needs to have? You would think it's a sword, but it's his spear. He loves having a spear. You just read that all the time. He's got a spear right there with him, and he's ready to throw it at whoever makes him angry, and fortunately for those people, he often misses. So he's sitting there, he's mad, he's holding on to his spear, and he's like going, I want somebody to tell me where David is. How can we not find him? And then Doeg the Edomite shows up, and he's just like, yeah, by the way, Ahimelech, he gave David some bread, he gave him Goliath's sword, and he prayed for him. So Saul, as we also expect, if he also has a sword, he's also angry and enraged. So he comes, he calls Ahimelech, he wants all the priests there, he comes forth and he's like, why are you trying to betray me? You're trying to you're trying to overthrow the kingdom. He's saying all these things. He accuses him, he gives all this big talk, and then this is how Ahimelech responds very bravely. This is what he says. Who of all your servants is as loyal as David, the king's son-in-law? He is also part of the family now. Captain of your bodyguard and highly respected in your household. Was that day the first time I inquired of God for him? Of course not. That's my job, man. That's what I do. I pray for people. Let not the king accuse your servant or any of his father's family, for your servant knows nothing at all about this whole affair. So he tells him. That's a good response. Maybe a little too bold, but this was the first king of Israel. Maybe they're not used to how you respond to a king so that you don't end up in trouble. So does anyone know how Saul responds? Yeah, that was a great point. You're right. I mean, of course, it makes sense why you would just pray for him. No worries, go on back. No, he asks for them to be all killed. And so Doeg the Edomite kills all of them except for one of them who gets away. So why is Jesus telling that story, one, and why go into so much detail? Let me find in my notes. Saul is angry, right? He's angry with God. He's angry with David. He's angry with his family for being friends with him, and now he's mad at Ahimelech. Ahimelech has a wonderful response, but Saul doesn't hear any of it, and he orders the murder of all the priests. Saul's evil and lust for power has reached its peak, and ultimately the priests of God are murdered for trying to pray for and help one of the king's men. And I tell that story because when we look at Saul's life, we see someone with a hard heart. He's made up his mind. He will seek to kill David so he will remain king. He's no longer listening to reason. He wants David dead, and no one will stand in his way. So again, going back to it, why is Jesus telling this story? Well, like so many other times, some of the synoptic gospels do help us out a little bit. Samuel and Mark both point out that David was in need, and Ahimelech is affirmed for helping someone during a time of need. Matthew adds this. He adds that the priests don't keep the Sabbath. You're like, what? Matthew adds that the priests don't keep the Sabbath. Someone's got to work on the Sabbath. And his point is that there's got to be some exceptions then if the priests don't have to keep the Sabbath, if they're allowed to work. And then Matthew goes on and says this, I tell you that something greater than the temple is here. If you had known what these words mean, I desire mercy, not sacrifice, you would not have condemned the innocent. For the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath. And he's going into here that mercy or mercy or love is more important than just keeping the rules. And in this case, it was better, Jesus is saying, it was better that the priest showed mercy to David, helped him out in time of need, rather than following the letter of the law in this case and not sharing or not giving the temple bread. Well, Jesus is going to take this thought and continue it on in our last story for today, which comes in Luke 6, verses 6 through 7. On another Sabbath, he went into the synagogue and was teaching, and a man was there whose right hand was shriveled. The Pharisees and the teachers of the law were looking for a reason to accuse Jesus, so they watched him closely to see if he would heal on the Sabbath. All right, so again, Luke has grouped these controversies together, but we can see the change, right, over just a few verses. They're hopeful, they're at least interested in what Jesus has to say, and now they're just looking for a chance, for any opportunity to accuse Jesus. They're watching and looking, wondering if Jesus is going to, we have a trap. There's someone who's injured on the Sabbath. All right, verses 8 and 9. But Jesus knew what they were thinking and said to the man with the shriveled hand, get up and stand in front of everyone. So he got up and stood there. Then Jesus said to them, I ask you, which is lawful on the Sabbath, to do good or to do evil, to save life or to destroy it? And at this stage in the game, I can't help but thinking that it kind of seems that Jesus and the religious leader are just frustrated with each other, right? They've just kind of had it. They're not really hiding behind anything anymore. Jesus knows that the Sabbath was supposed to be a gift for us. It's not a burden. It's a day of rest, a time to reflect on God and his goodness. And Jesus is going, certainly it's lawful to do good on the Sabbath. So he tackles the issue head on. And he's saying, as if, come on, guys, it's okay to do good on the Sabbath. But yet, from their response, as we'll see, we can only assume that they believe it's not okay to do work, any work, as long as if it's on the Sabbath. Verses 10 and 11, he looked around at them all and then said to the man, stretch out your hand. He did so, and his hand was completely restored. But the Pharisees and the teachers of the law were furious and began to discuss with one another what they might do to Jesus. And again, I've talked a lot in this story about the disappointment of the Pharisees, but I do want to point out one more time that for Levi was not disappointed in Jesus. This man whose hand was healed, I don't think he leaves disappointed with Jesus, right? And that's probably the focus we see in a lot of stories, but this one just had a little bit more with the Pharisees, so I touched on that. Another thing I want to say is, would this even qualify as work, right? If stretching out your hand is work, oh boy, that's a tough hill to die on. But I think the point is, that no, Jesus, you stood him out there, you stood him out in front of everyone. We know that you healed him. Healing is work. You did it in front of us, and now you're trying to rub our noses in it. Even if Jesus can still go like, look, again, asking someone to stretch out their hand, I don't know that that's going to even qualify in your book as work, but okay. And so here we are. We're at the end. They're just mad. They want to find a way to arrest him just because he healed someone on the Sabbath. And I say this again because I think for all of us, at least for me, there have been times in my life where I've been disappointed in what God has done. What he's done in my life, what he's done. Maybe there's times where we're frustrated that something isn't as clear. There's times where something didn't go on, whether it's a job or some kind of family issue that didn't go the way that we wanted. We were hoping he would come through, and he didn't. And depending on how big it is, a sickness, something that went on, the disappointment can be bigger. And so then what do we do? What do we do when we really feel that great bit of disappointment? And again, we see with these guys that eventually they got more and more angry, more and more frustrated, and they stopped being open to hearing anything from him anymore. And so what I would say instead is not that we won't feel some disappointment in God or what he's doing at some point, but what I'm saying is that can we stay in community when that's going on? Can we reach out to brothers and sisters in Christ who can help us through that? Can we stay close to God? Because James 4:8 tells us to draw near to God and he'll come near to us. Can we draw near to him when we're going through those difficulties? And what I would venture to say in my life, and I think in so many of your lives as well, is when we draw near to God, even through that disappointment, even through that grief, even through that sorrow, that's when we start to hear from him. That's when he starts to teach us in his time. And that's where real growth and development can really start to happen. But if we've shut him off, if we stop listening, we don't even hear what he has to say. And that's what, unfortunately, I think happened to many of the Pharisees in this story. They're not even hearing Jesus' argument. They're not sitting there going, well, could he be the bridegroom or not? Could he be the Messiah or not? Is he the Lord of the Sabbath? They're just so mad that he's breaking the Sabbath rules in their mind and not living up to the standard that they want, that they've stopped hearing. And I think we see that. And again, there's certainly been times in my life like that. There's maybe been times in your life like that. And the good news is that Jesus and God is always there. He's always there to welcome us back, to hear us out, to forgive anything, and to welcome us back with open and loving arms. He really does care. He really does love us, even through those times when we feel deep frustration or disappointment with him. So the question again that I had throughout this day is, what happens when we get disappointed in Jesus or God, and what is going to be our response? What's going to be our response? And again, we can have, it's only right to have all those frustrated and other emotions, but bring them to him as well. Talk to other people about that and process through that so that, again, you can be able to hear what he has for you and that you can experience once again the great love and kindness that he has for us. Let's go ahead and close in prayer.